welcome back to the show. I'm Phil Vischer. This is Phil Vischer Podcast. I'm here with Christian Taylor.
Hey, how are you?
Who's wearing gray.
And blue. There's a little blue.
Yeah, like an inch of blue. Wow.
A pop. We call this a pop of color.
A pop of color. And Sky Jitani.
I'm a pop of color.
You are, especially on this podcast.
Yeah.
You are our only color.
I'm a color.
Yeah, but you're
Peach
white,
is a color.
White bread.
I'm peach. I'm sorry. Sky is, yeah. Anyway, and we have a guest here via Skype 2 weeks in a row. Very exciting. We'll introduce him in a minute. First, I have to sing the theme song. Hey, it's a podcast. What do you know? Hey, it's a podcast. And we got video. Hey, it's a podcast. So lend an ear. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here. We'll talk to Sky.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Sky. And Christian, too.
Hi, Phil.
Hi. And we've got a guest here just for you. And I'm not saying his name yet. Hey, it's a podcast, so lend an ear. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here. The Phil Vischer Podcast starts right here. Okay, so we do have a guest. Our guest's name, our guest was named after a famous movie, which he probably, I assume you're familiar with this movie?
It's a great movie.
You like the movie?
Not really.
No, I didn't like it either.
It's a shyster.
Yeah. Our guest is Dr. Bob Roberts, Jr. He's the founding and senior pastor of Northwood Church near Dallas-Fort Worth. The congregation of active participants average in excess of 2,000. Northwoods has started over 173 churches in the U.S. and is a center for training new pastors. Is that true? More than 173?
It's not. It's 200.
That's more than 173.
That is.
So that is true.
Yeah, it's very true.
It's just out of date. Needs to be updated.
Just out of date. Okay. He's a leading practitioner and writer on Glocal transformation.
You mistyped your
No,
notes.
that's right. Glocal.
No, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, the world has changed. There's no local. There's no international anymore. Everything's meshed.
See, it's global and local.
I got that, but it really looks like a typo on Phil's computer. Are we being serious?
It is.
Yeah, we're being serious. Have you trademarked that word like
No,
Pat
Toyota-
Riley and Three-Peat?
Toyota came up with the word, not me.
Toyota came up with Glocal?
And it's how they work out of Japan and America. And then some sociologist named Robertson got hold of it. And then I heard Leonard Sweet talk about it. And so it's not my word.
So it is officially a Glocal bandwagon that you've jumped on. You're on the Glocal bandwagon.
And if you saw the movie Up in the Air with George Clooney, the other lady who's the star in that movie, she talks about the word. So yeah,
in the movie,
yeah, she does.
So I guess it's going to be in Webster's next year. That's my prediction.
I doubt that. It's a slow-moving word.
It'll be the new word of the year. Dr. Bob Roberts is the leading, and we're talking about the Tim Robbins film.
Right.
Bob Roberts. Did you see that?
A long time ago, but I don't remember it.
Yeah, it was. He plays an ultra right-wing conservative firebrand politician.
Which that fits you, right, Bob?
That's me.
Yeah, Your firebrand. Do people often put firebrand in your bio when they introduce you?
I do.
But in the movie, that movie actually convinced me that liberals were as afraid of conservatives as conservatives are of liberals.
Yes.
That there's just mutual terror.
Misunderstanding.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Roberts is a leading practitioner and writer on Glocal transformation of individuals, religious communities, non-governmental organizations, cities, and global engagement. He has worked extensively in Vietnam, Afghanistan, the West Bank, Gaza, Indonesia, Syria, Belize, and other countries.
All the hot vacation places.
Okay.
You've been a busy man, Dr. Bob Roberts. How old are you? I mean, are you like 85, and so you've had all this time to travel?
I'm 86.
Wow, that's impressive. How do you senior pastor a church and plant 200 other churches and work in many other countries at the same time?
Good team.
Really?
Good processes. And hard work.
So that's a Donald Trump answer, because Trump, you say, Donald Trump, how are you going to deport 16 billion people? And he says, one word, management.
Yeah.
Management.
I think you have to. But here's the thing I would say. For us, church planting is just like baptisms. or taking up the offering. It ought to be the natural life of every church.
Yeah.
And the global stuff, a lot of pastors, when they get at large churches, they wind up speaking at this conference or that conference. I just prefer working around the world.
Okay.
So that's what I do with it.
Okay, that works for me. I hear you. So here's an article about you in the Christian Science Monitor. It starts out, Pastor Bob Roberts is a committed evangelical Christian, a barbecue-loving Texan, and head of a large conservative congregation just outside Dallas with an essential mission to plant new churches around the world. So he's the first to say that it's sort of odd that his 30-year journey as an evangelical minister would lead him to stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the most prominent Muslim clerics in the world. He prays with them in their mosques, breaks bread with them Texas style at his home, and has become one of the leading Christian ministers of any persuasion in what he calls the fight against Islamophobia. Is that true?
Yeah, it is true.
All right, so you got to help everybody get some background on how a megachurch pastor in Dallas, Texas, comes to pray with Muslims in a mosque.
Well, it all starts with communism and Vietnam.
Okay.
And our church in 1994 wanted to pick a spot in the world to work. And this is true. This is no joke. So we began to pray about it. And a man was an atheist who became a Christian at our church. He was a doctor. He'd been shot down over Vietnam 3 different times, survived all 3 times as a helicopter pilot. When he came back, became a doctor. Said, let's go back to Vietnam. I said, we can't go to Vietnam. He said, why? I said, because it's closed. I'd just been to Fuller and got my DMin in missions. And as they taught us, you have closed countries and open countries, and they were closed. But he said, I'm a doctor. I can go anywhere in the world. And so, no joke, we all, me included, Xeroxed our doctor's license, got tourist visas to Vietnam, went to the National Hospital, and we volunteered to help. And that's part of the story, how it all started. And so what we did, we learned to work in the infrastructure of society. Instead of going there and doing Christian work with Christians underground, we went there and we worked with the government above ground as Christians, and then naturally talked about our faith. After 9/11, we were asked to do the exact same thing in Afghanistan, and we did, and it went over huge. It actually went faster in Afghanistan than it did Vietnam, because we were prototyping it in Vietnam. And so what I learned, here's what I didn't know. I didn't know how do you function in the world? What is it like to operate in the global society versus the church? And through doing that, I learned to relate to people. I learned to relate to governments. I started working with imams, and I'd started getting to know the Buddhist and the atheist, and we had faith conversations. And so it was just a natural thing when we went to the Middle East. And there was an opportunity we had to build a school for a guy who's a tribal leader for a huge part of Afghanistan. So we did, and he was bragging about it to these imams. And they said, well, hey, what if you built us a school? And so the rest is history. So together with the imams, me as a pastor, we started building schools, talking about our faith, and I don't know. That's how
in the process of doing this in Afghanistan, you were very transparent about your identity, about your faith, about the fact that you're a pastor. How was that received from these folks?
It was really received good. I was with the governor of a particular province. Here's what he told me. I said, look, I'm a Baptist pastor from Texas, and I'm not going to preach, pass out tracts, do religious work, but I'm not going to deny my faith. I'm here because of my faith. I want to serve people in the name of Jesus. But if somebody asks me, I'm going to share, but I'm not going to hide it either. But I'm not going to promote it. And I didn't know how he'd respond. And he said, thank you for being honest. Your missionaries come here and say they're businessmen, and they're not good at either one. And he started laughing. That's the truth. And he said, thanks for being honest. I can work with that. And so I've learned, frankly, there's not many evangelical pastors who are friends with people that are not Christians around the world. I'll just put it that way. And so they're curious, they're intrigued. Who are you? What do you believe? I've heard this about you guys. And it gives me freedom to ask them questions.
So I have a question. What do you say when you're trying to build a relationship with them and you're really not there to proselytize or, pass on your faith, what are the conversations about other than surface stuff? How do you have deeper conversations without them feeling threatened or feeling like you're trying to convert them to Christianity?
I think that's excellent. Well, and see, your premise starts with, like most people, how do you say those things? And so we generally start with the head. And then if we have a good conversation, we start liking them in our heart, and then maybe we can do something together. But we reverse the order. We start with the hand. So a lot of times we don't have faith conversations at first. You need a school? All right. How can we do that? What do you need? How do we do that? Or you need a clinic or whatever. So what you're doing, you're sweating together and you're building a relationship. So once you serve them, then you get to be close to them. And once you're close to them and then in your heart, then you can talk to them in your head. See, here's what we do. We Christians go around the world and we really don't bring any value to the world. We bring tension. We bring, when we push our religion, that sometimes changes political configurations. And so as a result of that, we don't understand how just merely people hearing about our faith has an impact on the society broader than just people getting saved. So if you can understand what a culture is like, what a society is like, you actually have a deeper conversation with the gatekeepers of those countries. And so it's easy, but it's natural. So it's not like, Bob, you got to go talk to this guy. People aren't asking me to go around the world to talk about God. They're asking me, hey, build a clinic. Hey, you work with Muslims and pastors in different countries. Could you come help us out over here? There's tension. So generally there's an issue and there's something that brings us together. And as we begin to work on that, then we naturally begin to talk.
So do you get accused of just promoting a social gospel of works, and service without actually presenting the gospel?
Yeah, I do by some people. But here's the thing. Here's the problem with that. Two things. First of all, I would say, what do we do that brings value to the society? When we go into a country or a closed country or somewhere else, what value do we bring to that country? And most of the time, Christians bring very little value. They maybe have people shift their religion, but the question beyond that, what value does it bring to that country as a whole? Well, when you look at the infrastructure of society and how it's put together, you start bringing value by serving with education or agriculture or water or just take your pick, any domain of society. Then what happens, they're ready to have that conversation. And so what I've discovered is people who think that they're going deep in that society because they go in and they have a lot of people preaching, neither is that true. It all comes down to how you're talking about your faith as you're naturally going about your business. So I would say my focus in the world is not the gospel of salvation. It's the gospel of the kingdom. And the difference is the gospel of salvation is just about me getting to go to heaven. Mm-hmm. The gospel of the kingdom starts with the person who's accepted Christ, but it goes way beyond that. I don't care that people get upset about that. It's because here's something else that happens. Believe it or not, people accept Christ. And when a gatekeeper accepts Christ, that's a game changer.
Right.
But here's what you can't do. I can't get up and say, hey, here's this person who accepted Christ. Mm-hmm. Whereas those who focus on the gospel of salvation want to say, look at this person who accepted Christ. See, our religion is right. Yours is wrong. We're in a tit for tat thing. That's just crazy. It hurts us and we don't realize that.
Right. But do you find it harder to raise support for these efforts if you can't, trumpet conversion successes?
Sure. People don't want to pay for that. They want to pay for hands that are raised and people that you dunked in the water, whether they live for God or not. And what a lot of people who fund that stuff don't understand is they praise God, they got saved. And next week, they gave the Shahada and they became a Muslim. And the next week, they became a Buddhist. It just depends on who's in town and what they're offering. Mm-hmm. And we don't understand that accepting Jesus is more than just praying this little prayer.
Yeah.
Can you share a story where this type of ministry really transformed people or a community or something? You know what I'm asking?
I can tell you lots of stories.
Tell me your best one.
I've heard some of his crazy stories. I'm not sure he's allowed to share those over open broadcast.
It's true. Your best things you really can't share. because they're works in progress,
Right,
and
right.
God knows what they are. But let me just give you one cool story that I like a lot. Is there's a guy? Let me just say a particular country. How's that?
Okay.
There's a guy from a particular country who's a friend of mine, and he's a painter. And if you ever visit our church, we have incredible art from all over the world. And I got to know him. So he wasn't a Christian, and but he's a friend. So our church paid his way for him to come spend a weekend at our church and sell his paintings. So he started doing that every year. He would make more money in a weekend than he would all year just through selling it to people at the church. Not Christian art, incredible art though. I mean, just went over huge. We introduced him in, different art festivals in the U.S. and it went over huge. Well, he came back one year and I was preaching a sermon series called Eraser, and it was on forgiveness. And he'd been in our church, and so he didn't always totally understand how to act in church. But I'm in the middle of talking about Jesus erases our sins, but we can give him control of our life and invite him. He'll come in and, so forth, so on. So during my sermon, he comes walking up to the platform and he said, "Today, I'm giving my heart to Jesus, and he's going to erase my sins." And so I called him by name. I said, "Man, you don't have to do that." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you're still our friend. I mean, I would love for you to follow Jesus, but you don't need to follow Jesus to honor us. That's a personal decision. And my friendship is based on me loving you, not whether you do that or not. I would love for you to follow Jesus, but you need to understand what it means." He said, "No, I've thought about this for a long time, and I wanted to wait until I came here." And so he gave his heart to Christ, but it doesn't stop there. He went back to his country, started telling the other painters and the artists in the country about what he was doing. And now there's 3 gatherings of artists. They meet together. It's their church, for lack of a better term. And they meet together weekly, and they're artists. And so because they're connected with artists, also musicians. And now there's groups of musicians that are meeting. And so it's built around what we do, society. It's not built around a church. It's built around society. So what we teach our young pastors, it's not the grid of the church, it's the grid of the society. And a church is merely the result of engaging the society.
It's culture. It's engaging, and changing culture. That's phenomenal. Here's a quote from you that is kind of interesting, because now we bring it back to the U.S. You are credited as being one of the leading Christian ministers leading the fight against Islamophobia. Here's a quote from Bob Roberts. "Right now, the biggest challenge in fighting Islamophobia is my tribe, the evangelicals." Would you like to unpack that statement?
No. Because here's what I discovered. When I started working with Muslims, I was scared to death of them. And I became friends of all people with Muslims from Afghanistan, the imams. So if anybody, that's a crash course in how to get to know your Muslim. You really don't want to go to Afghanistan to do that. I was raised as a little kid. I went as a Southern Baptist through this thing called RAs, Royal Ambassadors.
I was a GA.
Okay, so you remember the pledge? As a Royal Ambassador, I'll do my best to be an informed, well-informed, responsible follower of Jesus Christ, to work with others in sharing Christ around the world, and to keep myself clean and healthy in mind and body.
Yep.
Wow.
So I grew up believing that. So I thought, well, hey, you start reaching out to Muslims and befriend them and start telling them about Jesus, everybody will just be excited. Well, they were, but not in a positive way. What are you doing with all them Muslims? Well, the Great Commission is for them. Yeah, it's for them, but we're at war with Islam, and we got to watch out. They're terrorists. And so I'd tell people, when we started doing things at our church, and the Muslims would start coming to big events, they'd say, this is dangerous. And I'd say, well, are you a Christian? Yeah. You die, you go to heaven? Yeah. Well, if you get blown up, it's just you're never going to know what hit you. It's all right. No worries.
That's what I tell people.
That didn't seem to calm people down. It made them actually a little bit more nervous. So here's what I discovered, that most of our faith as evangelicals, it's more tribal than it is Jesus. If you look at Jesus, he really loved everybody. If Jesus was around today, he would be best friends with a Muslim, a gay person, and I don't know, somebody else. But it would be somebody that everybody else was afraid of, that everybody else had rejected.
Basically the opposite of Westboro Baptist.
Very much.
Yeah.
Very much. But here's the problem. We don't know how to relate to people. There's no civility. We know how to state our position. We don't know how to love people. Jesus always started with loving people first. Look at the woman at the well. That's pretty significant. Hanging out with a woman in broad daylight, telling the apostles, go away, you needed to talk to her. You can imagine what they were talking about. I hope he isn't doing something back there. Really, that was pretty radical what he did.
Right.
So evangelicals, we have meshed the gospel of America with the gospel of the kingdom, and it's become the same thing. And so as a result of that, we let our nationalism determine who we love or not, or our tribalism, and we're more afraid of our tribe than we are others, and are more afraid of, because here's what I've discovered. Muslims have not been that hard on me. There's been some times when I've been around the world, I was pretty nervous, but beyond that, back home, it's more my tribe that comes after me just for being friends.
Right.
Well, I got in a lot of trouble from my tribe, or from some people in the tribe, because I said Franklin Graham was all upset about this Muslim prayer room.
The prayer room at the Orlando International Airport.
Yes, and my response was to that, well, I think we ought to go help them build it. And everybody basically said, Christian, you need to stop wanting to hug everybody and love everybody. And, but I'm curious, what would you say
about
that?
And then the comparison there, because it was an interesting story. I assume that you followed it. And the question was, is this tax dollars, are American taxpayers building a Muslim prayer room in the Orlando International Airport? And of course, Franklin Graham, tweeted about it and said if it was a Christian prayer room, people would be going nuts if we're using tax dollars on that. And so, Christian made the comment, well, if we're trying to really show hospitality, shouldn't we be helping them build it for all the people that are going to come over on, Emirates Airlines for the first time and have a clean place to pray? And that led to some very interesting discussions about, okay, well, are you going to build a strip club for those neighbors that want a strip club? And are you going to build a heroin den for those neighbors that want to shoot heroin? Are you promoting sin, which led at one point for me to pose the question, if a synagogue burns down in your neighborhood, should you cheer or help rebuild it as a Christian? What's your take on that?
My take on that is most evangelicals believe in religious freedom for Christians. And that's about it.
Yeah. Actually, there was a survey that just came out today from Barna about religious liberty, and it showed they took all these different groups of people, and it found that evangelicals are the most worried about religious liberty. But then in the same survey found that I think it was like 80% of evangelicals believe that Christian values should be given priority in the United States. So there's your contradiction. We want religious liberty, but we want it for ourselves.
Right, but how do you get away from the notion that part of the strength of America is the undergirding of Christian values? And if you want America to be strong, you need to promote those values.
Yeah, but there's a difference between promoting those values culturally and promoting them through the government.
Yeah. And you can't ask for those kind of liberties and deny others those same things. It's just not logical.
Well, I can.
Most people.
But you shouldn't.
Okay.
And we do, but it hurts us.
Yeah.
So I supported the mosque in New York City. I wrote an editorial about it when they were looking at doing it. Because I agree with Islam? Not at all. But because I believe in religious freedom. And so if you understand what we do here impacts there. So can you imagine how Muslims feel about that when they hear evangelical leader pushes back on mosque being built? What kind of statement does that make? What does that do to the missionaries? What does that do to the Christian workers in that country that hear all that? It has a horrible impact, just a horrible impact. And so what we have to do is to realize there are certain values that we've had in America that has been phenomenal for building our country, but also incredible for the world. And see, religious freedom, if everybody doesn't have it, then that means I don't have it either. Or I'm going to lose it.
Right.
So can I tell you what we're doing in Pakistan?
What are you doing in Pakistan?
All right. So we came up with this idea back in January of 2014. We met with the top Islamic leaders and Christian leaders in Nepal. And one of the leading imams in the U.S. was there, Imam Majid Muhammad, and myself, representing him Muslims, me Christians. And they're giving all these white papers about how to get along so that the minorities are not taken advantage of in these countries. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, Majid, let's build a bridge between the imams and the pastors. And so, because it's minority rights, you're concerned about Islamophobia in America. We're concerned about Christianophobia in Pakistan and other minorities, and we want them protected as well. And so, what if we did that hand, heart, head thing together? And so, last May, we met at a Dallas Cowboy dude ranch. And for 3 days, 12 top imams, 12 top evangelical pastors went hunting, fishing, shooting, everything you could imagine, eating, hanging out, having a blast. First day, everybody was kind of quiet. By the third day, we were having fun, laughing our guts out.
Wait, are you
And
telling
then
me
we
that
went-
you gave guns to Muslims?
You're
In Texas,
You're in Texas,
you
get it.
armed Muslims in Texas.
Listen, we arm everybody in Texas. It's bad. It's bad. Even for a Texan, it gets scary. So we went to the Doha then and did the exact same thing. And we brought out the top Pakistani religious leaders, the Grand Imam, the chairman of the Ulema Council, along with some of the top evangelical guys who are in charge of significant evangelical movements. When you get to know one another and you have a conversation, you start watching out for one another. And so we made a commitment. We would stand up for Muslims in America. You stand up for Christians in Pakistan. So here's what happens. They start sending me all these articles about how they're rebuilding churches that have been burnt down, how they're speaking out against all this stuff. And I mean, they really are. I mean, they're doing an incredible job. And these are the top Islamic leaders. So they hear about Franklin Graham and his comment about don't let anyone immigrate from a Muslim country and talking about Japanese internment camps and all this. And so their response was, Bob, is that something you should say something about? Which made me feel bad. You know, you don't want to mess with Franklin Graham. He's Billy Graham's son.
Right.
Deep down, he's probably a nice guy. And so I'm nervous about that. But I'm thinking, you know what? They're watching. They're standing up for me. Am I going to stand up for them?
Mm-hmm.
And so we did. We called a little press conference. Not many people came, but Religious News Service, a few others. And basically didn't trash Franklin Graham, just said not all evangelicals feel the way that feel the way that he feels, that you've made valuable contributions to our society. We love you. We appreciate you. And as the majority, we have a responsibility to stand up for minorities. And so we did that, which helped tremendously. And it led to the thing we're doing October 22. It's called Spreading Peace. First ever gathering of evangelical pastors and imams. And the goal is to have 200 evangelical pastors. We're about at 100 now. And 200 imams. And they're having to hold their hands back on that because they want to meet. Because the biggest challenge, because we're such conservatives, we're their biggest challenge. So our eschatology, you know, I was raised on an eschatology that all the Jews have to go back to Israel before Jesus comes back. You know, so, I mean, the Muslims, when I got to know Muslims in the Middle East, they'd say, why do you guys love the Jews but hate us Arabs? You know, and I realized our eschatology was actually getting in the way with the Great Commission. And that's speculative.
Wow.
Nobody knows for sure. So that's kind of how it's playing itself out. So October 22, if you want to come, it's at spreadingpeace.net.
Where is that going to happen?
Notes, you could. It's at D.C.
Whoa.
I really, really wanted to go, Bob.
I want to too, but I'm not a pastor. Darn it.
I have a prior commitment. I'm speaking somewhere else, but this is an issue that's near and dear to me. I've been a part of trying to build some bridges with the Muslim community over the years, partly because of my own background. But it is incredibly difficult because the rhetoric in the popular media, in the church, is Islamophobia. And there are certainly bad elements within Islam around the world, and there are some bad elements within the church. But the rational, moderate, civil voices are just getting drowned out because politically, on both sides, there's a lot to be gained by making people afraid of the other side.
Right.
And so it's very hard for voices like Bob's or others to get a platform.
Right. So what kind of what
It doesn't want to cover it. I mean, oh, that's wonderful. We're glad you're doing that. But unless we're going to, shoot one another, they won't be there. So
Right.
it gets frustrating.
Yeah, maybe you could invite also like 200 bikers to show up, and then there might be more likelihood of some, violent interactions, and then the press would come.
Yeah, you know what? I told some of my imams, a lot of people are talking about gun control. I figured out how to fix that.
Oh, yay. Tell us.
You need 200 imams to show up at the next national meeting of the NRA, stand up and say, we're with you guys. It's over.
Oh,
They'll be
man.
screaming for gun control.
So here's a quote. ISIS is promoting the narrative that the West represents Christianity and Judaism and is fighting Islam. And if we can counter that by demonstrating how Christians, not just on the liberal and progressive side, but also on the conservative side, and Muslims are working together and doing the work of the Lord, this is in itself peacemaking. That quote was from Salem Al-Marayati, Executive Director of the Muslim Public Affairs Council in Washington, D.C. So, he's saying, in effect, the point of view that we need to keep Muslims out, or that Muslims are dangerous and need to be, controlled in the West, plays into the narrative of ISIS that the West is at war against Islam and is actually the opposite of making peace. Do you agree with that?
I do, very strongly.
Okay.
And that's why we do projects together. Can I tell you something that I've observed is we Christians want to go around the world as Christian and do Christian stuff.
Yeah.
That would be so foreign to Jesus.
That's why we have Christian cruises.
Christian cruises. but okay, so you remember Seeker churches, the big thing in the 90s?
Yes.
I don't know how old you guys are.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're old enough.
All right. I think we ought to have Seeker missions. Why shouldn't we do the Great Commission beside Muslims doing dawah together, serving the good of community? I mean, if everything we say is out there and transparent, we speak with one voice and one conversation, and we're honest about what we believe, why can't we do that? And I think we can. And so what we've attempted to do around the world, and what I do, is connect pastors and imams to go into places that Christians would never get to go. And I'll have the imams. They'll introduce us. Hey, this is Bob Roberts. He's a Christian. Now, here's what a Christian believes. They're explaining it better than I ever could. and they're ready to have a relationship on Good Friday. No, not Good Friday, Palm Sunday this last year. We had 7 of the top young Saudi clerics come to our church because they love what we do around the world. And they wanted to see what a Christian worship service was like. And so I actually had one of them translate the sermon for me. And it was a spur of the moment thing. So the reality is, the very people we would like to get to hear the gospel, the way we do it turns them off. Whereas if we would be in relationship with them, working together, serving the good of the community, right beside them, there's value to that. And think of what value it does when an imam and a pastor shows up in Iraq or Syria,
right,
or places like that. All of a sudden it's, man, they're friends. What is this about?
So, Bob, what is the critique that you receive when you do things like this from other evangelicals? Is it you shouldn't be cooperating with people that we disagree with, or you're giving a platform to Islam when you shouldn't be? What is the critique? Why do people flip out on you?
The first critique is that I've watered down the gospel. But it's not valid. If you listen, and you can Google, a lot of the places I speak are on the internet. Any meeting I'm at, I'm explaining that I'm an evangelical, and I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And there's no other way to the Father except through him. So I'm an exclusivist in that sense. But I also believe that since that's true, then I ought to love you all the more, serve you all the more. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be what you said. Yes, you give them a platform. And why do you do that? But my feeling is, just like Billy Graham went to North Korea, Russia, and other places, why shouldn't we? I don't see Jesus holding off on those places. The apostles, definitely. I mean, if you look at their lives, what happens, after the cross, they're all over the place, meeting with all kinds of people. And I think it's only in the past 75 to 100 years as evangelicals, we've really pulled back and said, these ones are okay and those are not. So I think that's a big thing. I think I've also been accused of you're making Islam palatable to people. And so as a result, people are not going to be afraid and something bad's going to happen. And I think, I just think about that verse where Jesus said, keep them scared so they won't do anything. And I don't know. I don't want to do that.
Not long after 9/11, I was invited to speak to a college group at a mega church here in the Chicago area that will remain unnamed. We'll just say a particular mega church. And so I spoke there, and then the youth pastor, or the college pastor, knew that I had studied Islam as an undergrad and said, "Hey, I'm gonna throw you some softball questions at the end of the night because people have questions." So I said, "Sure." So after I did my talk, he started asking me questions about Islam, and he said, "Isn't the Quran inherently violent, and doesn't it call for the destruction of all non-Muslims?" And I knew what he was trying to do, and I didn't play along. I said, "Well, not exactly. You're taking those texts out of context, and you could take passages of the Old Testament and say it's, call for genocide or whatever." And I said to him, "Look, and everyone else in this group, I have friends who are Muslims. I have close family friends who are Muslims. Many of them are loving, peaceful, civil, good neighbors, and we need to not overstate the fact that these terrorists did a horrible thing, but it doesn't represent all Islam." Anyway, after I did that and the group left, this pastor came up to me and he was irate. I was supposed to come back the next week. He rescinded that invitation. And he said, "There are young adults here who are curious about Christianity, and you just presented Islam as if it's not a horrible thing." And he just went off on me. And it was because he just wanted to paint it black and white, that all Christians are good and all Muslims are bad, and I didn't take the bait. But that I can't believe that here we are 15, 14 years later, and we're still seeing kind of...
Was he more upset that you said the Quran can be interpreted peacefully or the Bible can be interpreted violently?
Well, what I said is any religious text can be interpreted often any way we want it to be.
Okay.
And you can't just take a single text out of the Quran and say all Islam is this.
Right.
So, but that's the narrative that people want to believe because they don't want to deal with the complexities of real relationships with real people.
Right.
Yeah, the worst place in the world to learn about Islam is at your local Christian bookstore. If you really want to learn about religions, get to know people of those faiths. For example, I've read the Quran, and the differences they're glaring.
But can't you also, though, err by, I know a Muslim and he's a wonderful family man, so that's what all Muslims are like.
Right.
Can't you go both ways with overgeneralization?
I think you can, and there's no doubt about that. But I do know some Muslims like that. And so I'm not afraid to say that. But you can't overgeneralize. But here's what I would say. There are more peaceful Muslims than there are more violent Muslims. Yes, there's violent Muslims, a lot of them. I'll give you that. But even so, having said that, the overwhelming majority are not. And here's what's sad about the violent Muslims. The majority Muslims are just as afraid of them as we are because they've had to live with them and put up with them for a lot longer. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just us, it's them as well.
I have another question.
Go.
Okay, so when you meet up with other evangelical leaders who take a completely different tact and are sort of inflaming the passions and the stereotypes, do you confront them? And if so, how does that play out?
No, I don't confront them. I did this statement with Franklin Graham. Generally, you can Google me. You'll find out I'm a Muslim, and I've started a new religion, and Islamist, and everything else. My son tells me when I get discouraged, I just Google your name. I start laughing, and it makes me feel good.
Wow.
So I would just say, two things. Number one, we start a lot of churches. I'm not optimistic about guys my age. I'm 57. I'm not optimistic about guys that are 45 and older being open. I'm very optimistic about people in their 20s and early 30s. We literally lost hundreds of people from our church when we started to reach out to Muslims. And a couple of years later, we started desegregating our church. And there's nothing like that'll shrink a white church like being friends with Muslims and hiring black staff. I mean, that'll get you in trouble real quick.
Especially in Texas.
Unfortunately.
Or any southern
state
or Mississippi.
It's true. And, I used to be frustrated. I thought, Lord, why didn't you stick me, even though my ancestors died in the Alamo, but why didn't you stick me in the West Coast or the Northeast? Because I'm evangelical, but at heart I'm an evangelist, and I want to build relationships with people to hear about Jesus. But, Texas is an incredible mission field to teach Christians how to love people. It really is. We love our own, and we love visitors.
That's true.
Muslim or you're Mexican, as long as you're mowing our grass, we're okay with that. But to really love you and care about you and to be a part of our community. But the good news is, when we lost people that were older, we gained all these young couples, and because there's a different mindset with young people. There really is. How they feel about we literally, I mean, just recently at one of our big events, we had several families that were saying the reason we're here is because young families is because we've read about your church or seen it in the news, how you reach out to Muslims or how you've intentionally desegregated your staff and all of this. So in the past, to grow your church, what you had to do was to keep your mouth shut about social issues. And I would say that's still true for today, but the day is coming, and it's almost here, where churches are not going to have that luxury anymore because it's tied to ethics and integrity and justice and honesty. And I just think we can't ignore that anymore. So what I would say is my focus is on those young pastors. How am I teaching them? So we train our church planters. We'll take them to mosque. We take them to synagogues. I'll literally teach them how to start a church sitting inside a synagogue with the rabbi present, or a Buddhist temple, or because I want them to feel comfortable in the public square. I don't want them to bump up against other religions and go, oh, this is weird. I mean, think about the early church. It wasn't growing because there were disgruntled Baptists going to a new non-denominational church. It was growing because...
Are you sure? I mean, do you know that for a fact historically?
People
Baptists have always been disgruntled, haven't they?
Jews and polytheists. They just found something incredible in Jesus.
Right.
So what kind of gospel is that?
So last question. Would you rather err by being too friendly to people who might actually wish you harm, or by being too suspicious to people that don't wish you harm?
I want to be like Jesus and be suspicious. I mean, he had Peter sharpening his sword all night long, and Peter missed. He wasn't going for his ear. He was going for the throat. No, I'm teasing. Why would you not lead with love? I mean, if it's really the gospel of kingdom, let's err on the side of love.
Because I'm scared. I'm scared, Bob Roberts.
I was thinking about this today.
Yeah.
Has anything ever gone wrong by operating out of love and compassion?
You get taken advantage of.
Jesus was crucified.
Yeah.
Well, other than that.
Well, but you got to have the longer horizon. You got to look at the resurrection
I'm
and the
talking
whole
about
thing.
if I'm a person and I'm going to have to decide how to behave or interact with somebody or handle myself, can I go wrong by taking the loving way?
Probably not. But the thing
That's
is,
what I meant.
fear is so much easier to cultivate in people than love.
Right.
I think too, I mean, the Bible makes it clear, this whole thing about faith and love. And I mean, if we're driven by fear, and I would say we all have fears. I mean, sometimes, honestly, some places in the world that I go to, I'm afraid. But the reality is, I know that there's something bigger that I'm a part of, and I realize that I'm an eternal being, and I hope nothing happens, but there's something bigger at stake here. So I don't know. I think we have to push fear, love.
Thanks, Bob.
That's good stuff, Bob.
Very good stuff to think about.
All right, Phil.
Pastor Bob, Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob was my grandpa. Dr. Bob.
Really?
Yeah, Dr. Bob Brown. Everybody just called him Dr. Bob. Do people call you Dr. Bob, or do they call you Pastor Bob?
They call me Bob.
They just call me Bob.
A guy so nice they named him twice.
That's right.
I wish I was Philip Phillips. That would be nice.
And what would I be, Sky?
Yeah, you'd be Sky. You could be Christian. Is Christian a surname? Or there?
Yes.
Christensen. Yeah, Chris Christian. Yeah, he was a singer. Christian.
Christian.
Okay.
Or I could be Taylor too. That works.
Or Marky Mark. Okay, I'm wrapping it up. Hey, there's a guy. Should you be nice to him? Or he might be a radical Muslim, but Bob Roberts says, I'm gonna be vocal and we should live a little more glocally. So meet with an imam, take him out for dinner. Just don't tell him right away you think he's a sinner, because it's not a way to win a friend over dinner. Instead, use your hands and build a clinic in his homeland and then make something out of the sand. Because Dr. Bob Roberts says start with your hands and go to your heart and then to your... You do eventually get to the head, right?
I do.
Eventually. And then you'll get to the head. All right. Thanks, Dr. Bob Roberts. Thanks for being on the show. I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Bob.
your
Thank
time.
you.
Hey, I had fun with y'all.
Cool. We'll see you next time.
Bye.